Okay, Dr. Adeseye, we are unmuting you. Let's make sure your audio is working.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Perfect, loud and clear. Okay, I'll go ahead and do our introduction here. So thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's webinar hosted by the SIR Resident Fellow Section International Outreach Committee. It's co-chaired by Yi Yang and myself, Andrew Moore, and I just wanted to give a real brief introduction of our our host and our guest. So our host tonight is Dr. Khalid Ahmed. He's an excellent member of our International Outreach Committee who we've had the pleasure of working with for a couple of years now, and was gracious enough to agree to host tonight's interview with Dr. Ademola Adeseye. So I had the honor and pleasure to work with Dr. Adeseye during my intern year. He was my chief at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center general surgery program, and being a successful international medical graduate himself, he was a great resource for us to utilize. Kind of one of the missions of our International Outreach Committee is to provide resources for international students, residents, and fellows who are interested in pursuing training in the U.S. And I was very happy and surprised to see that Dr. Adeseye had literally written the book on the topic, published last year, that you can see here in the middle of our picture, Making the Match, a practical guide to U.S. residency for international medical graduates. So when we were looking for good resources to provide through our committee, we thought an interview with him would be extremely helpful, and he was gracious enough to share his time with us. So just a couple of quick points I wanted to point out for the webinar before we let Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Adeseye take the stage. So Dr. Adeseye is, his training background is general surgery and thoracic, he's currently in his thoracic surgery fellowship. So it's not IR, but I think there's a huge amount of crossover in the experience of applying to U.S. residency, regardless of the specialty, and even more so within procedural specialties. So I think there's a lot that we can gain from his insights. So if there's any questions at the end that are very, very IR specific, Khalid can jump in, or we can jump in to help field those. But I suspect 99% of it is going to be pretty cross-compatible. And we are going to do a Q&A session at the end with the audience. The easiest way to do that is any questions that you have as an audience member during the course of this, just type them into the questions box there on the GoToWebinar control panel that you have, or the screen. And Yi and I will kind of field those at the end and provide them for Ahmed, or Dr. Ahmed and Dr. Adeseye to answer. So we'll probably do about 45 minutes of interview between the two of them, and then when it's a natural place for us to jump in with Q&A from audience members, we'll go from there. So I'll go ahead and let you take over, Khalid.
Sure. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Yi, for organizing this amazing webinar. I have the pleasure to be the one interviewing here. And I had the pleasure of working with the SIR RFS International Outreach Committee. So a little about myself. My name is Khalid Ahmed. I'm an international medical graduate from Sudan. And I just recently matched this year into internal medicine residency in Pennsylvania. Today I'll be interviewing Dr. Ademola Adeseye, and who is an international medical graduate himself from Nigeria, and is currently a thoracic surgery fellow at Texas Health Institute. I had the pleasure of reading his amazing book, in my opinion, to be honest, which is very detailed and helpful for all the IMGs who are trying to take the road to residency in the US. It's called Making the Match. It's a practical guide to US residency for international medical graduates. So the residency process is a lengthy one. We'll try to cover as much as we can throughout this interview, and everyone has different experiences, but hopefully there are some experiences that are common to the general people. And yeah, I'll let Dr. Adeseye continue the introduction about himself, and then we can start with the interview.
Yeah, thank you so much for your very kind words, Khalid, and congratulations on the match.
Thank
And
you.
also, I want to say thank you to Andrew and Yi for all you've done to get this together, as well as big thank you to RFS for putting this together. Pretty much, Khalid and Andrew have said it all. I'm from Nigeria, trained at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, then transitioned over to the US. Did my general surgery residency at the University of Oklahoma, where I had the pleasure of working with Andrew, as you mentioned. And right now, I'm in the second year of three. I'm in the second year of a 3-year, residency slash fellowship. We use a residency term at Texas Heart slash Baylor. So I'm in my second year, wrapping up my second year, and about to start my third year. And that's about it. In the last few years, I've really taken mentorship as my theme. That's really my goal right now. I just really want to help people succeed in their goals. I've seen too many people make too many mistakes, and that's pretty much how it is. Making the match started like an email to somebody, and it's a book today. And as many people get the opportunity to read it, the hard copy or Audible or Kindle, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adeseye, for this warm welcome. And so just a quick introduction on how we're going to go through this to the audience. We will try to start with the process of before preparing, and then hit a little about the USMLE preparation, and then what would you do after the USMLE, and the journey until making the match. So Dr. Adeseye, I would start. I've honestly went through your book, and I want to ask you. So what made you like train? Like why did you choose the U.S.? Why, for the audience? Why should they train in the U.S.?
In my personal opinion, I think, with respect to medical training, like, almost anything else, the US literally boasts of being the best. And, whether the US healthcare system is the best in the world is out for debate, but with respect to the training itself, I think the US definitely trumps all other countries. And aside from that, in the developed world, to my knowledge, there's no other country that gives as much opportunity for foreign medical doctors as the US does. Also, if you're if you're from a country that even though English is not your first language, provided you can speak English, you'll be able to assimilate well into the community in the US versus going to another country and having to learn a new language altogether. So, but for me, how did I end up here and why? For me, it was literally ambition. I wanted a world-class training. The US met the mark. I did not want to be shortchanged by the limitations of my home country, just like any third world country. And my dreams were greater than the opportunities that were available to me in my immediate environment. And I looked at the US, and it was just clear the opportunities were there. If I could meet certain requirements, I was welcome. And it was just a natural choice. And it's a choice I would recommend highly to any foreign medical graduate who's seeking training abroad as well.
Oh, thank you for this really comprehensive answer. Actually, you've said some stuff that I wouldn't even put into words myself. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure this is a dream that would make you push yourself to make it happen.
Literally.
Yeah. So one of the things I realized that myself and my colleagues that went through that that sometimes the road to yes, IMGs view it as like lengthy or in terms of time. So I see you mentioned in your book that time is an important factor. Did you ever think it's too late to pursue a dream? Is this a question people should ask themselves?
I think so. I really think so. And this is not, just with respect to anything, but not just residency. We as life goes on, we keep asking ourselves, is it too late, to get married? Is it too late to relocate? Is it too late to get that degree? You know, and same thing as doctors, we ask ourselves that question. I think it's never too late. Time definitely is the currency you're going to be spending in pursuit of your goals, but it's never too late. And part of the reason people bring it up a lot is because we always talk about the time factor in applying for residency. I personally know, for example, an IMG who matched 21 years after graduating from medical school.
Wow.
Yeah. So now, I've got to put a disclaimer out there. In general, the further you are
Yeah.
out from graduation, the more difficult, the process is. But it's never too late, and that's why webinars like these are so important. Particularly for those in the early stage of the process, so they can plan. But it's never too late. It's better if you start earlier than later. But that's why dreams are dreams. If you really believe in them, you chase them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more, to be honest with what you're saying. People should always pursue what they want, and there's always a way to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So another question, other than time, people, IMGs tend to, and even myself, I'm including myself in these questions to make it realistic. That sometimes you think that it's a little bit tough to make it, or it's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But in terms of matching in the US as an IMG, how do you balance the realistic chances with the ambitions of pursuing, for example, your dream specialty, which might be a competitive one?
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with you. And the fact that you think that way, when candidates think that way and they look at the playing field, and they feel like my dream job is, my goal is to be a dermatologist. My goal is to be an orthopod.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. But there's also that aspect where, like you said, reality, as in right now, I know what my dream car is, but I don't drive it yet,
Yeah.
but so you really just have to come to terms with what will make you happy. I always tell people, don't go into a specialty if you know it won't make you a happy person or a happy doctor. We already have too many unhappy people around. There's so many people, not just in medicine, who are unhappy with their, line of work or their career path. And we have so many like that in medicine. You find maybe somebody in an allied specialty, maybe like a PA or nurse practitioner whose dream was always to be a doctor, but decided to, for some reason went a different route, and then they live with that kind of you know, for no better word, grudge all their life. For some people, just the prospect of getting into any residency position, any residency at all, will appease their ambition, and that's fine. But for some others, it's either a specific, specialty or nothing else. So the goal is, you want to sit down and ask yourself, what is going to make me happy? My goal is to be a dermatologist, but am I going to be equally happy just being a cardiologist? My goal is to be an orthopod, but am I going to be happy being, a urologist? But if you can sincerely answer that question, then the next question is, what next do you do? But if you know that nothing else is going to make you happy, rather than be a grumpy emergency medicine, doctor, just because you really wanted to be a gastroenterologist, I think you should sincerely consider other paths. But that is just the reality of where we find ourselves.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair enough. And I mean, everything you said, I actually I agree with with everything you said. But there's also like on the same topic, some people ask should I have a plan A? Should I have a plan B? Should I have a plan C? In terms of realistic chances, or
oh yeah, most definitely. Every time I counsel people, I always tell them that I highly encourage that you have a backup plan. In the absence of you being absolutely certain that you're going to match into your desired specialty, and that does happen. There's some people who are so sure, maybe because of how attractive they've made themselves, and they already have their tentacles sunk into a particular program, and they just know that they're going to end up at that program. Then maybe you can take a chance. But in the absence of that, which is not, that's the situation many of us find ourselves. Please and please have a backup plan. And I always give this example. Mine was internal medicine. I applied for general surgery, but my plan A was general surgery. My plan B was internal medicine. And my plan C was that I was going to work with my MPH degree. So I had all those plans, laid out, and I highly encourage, people. It's just one of those, like we said in the last question, being realistic. Doesn't smack of self-doubt. I think it smacks of, you having a plan and being realistic.
Yeah. I feel like this is what the people need to hear. And this is the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So in the book, which I recommend the audience to really read, I'm sure it won't only just guide you through U.S. pathway, but I found it as a motivation that would IMGs that could have for themselves to pursue this dream. There's a sentence that I wanted you to please elaborate, because I thought it was a very important one.
Sure.
He said the number one flaw is the failure to understand the extent of the challenge that IMGs face.
And yeah. Ever since ever since I started mentoring and talking with people, and I wrote the book, that hasn't changed. I think because in the book, after I mentioned that statement, I went ahead to elaborate what I meant. And partly why I say that is because somehow the idea that all you need to get into a U.S. residency as an IMG is passing the USMLE. Somehow that idea has permeated the world of IMGs, and nothing could be further from the truth. The challenge is monstrous. The challenge is beyond just passing an exam. And in the book, I went on to elaborate on this number one flaw. It was like a three-pronged number one flaw. I was like, number one, we underestimate the competition. We come from, we're all smart, we're all brilliant, from Nigeria, from Sudan, from Pakistan. Maybe you were in a class of 100 and you graduated top 5, and now you've come over to the US, and you still have that notion that you were top 5 in your class in Pakistan or Sudan or Nigeria or Cameroon, and even though that's not even in your entire country, you just carry that notion that, oh yeah, you're still going to be the big fish. But however, you don't realize that you've left a pond, and now you're still a big fish, but you're a smaller fish with respect to the size of the ocean in which you're swimming in. So underestimating the competition, and the next thing I also said in the book was a lack of understanding of the design, not the content, but the design of the USMLE exams. And finally, I said a lack of understanding of the application process. I think these three things, is literally what, seals the fate, unfortunately, of many IMGs. They come in, they believe that I need to pass the USMLE, so they arrive in the US in January, and they write the USMLE on February 1st, thinking they're going to apply, in September. And then all of a sudden they realize that, it's a bigger world than that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I actually I agree with what you're saying. That it's very important to understand like the competition of what you're signing up for, before even starting the process, and then in the first place. Yeah, and this is an advice for our audience who are pursuing this road. So I would like to move on, since we brought this topic up. How would you suggest that IMGs should start their preparation? Like, should they jump directly into the materials and studies? Should they read the bulletin? Should they ask seniors who have done it before? Is there or how did you do it, or how would you advise them?
Yeah, I think those those are all really great ways to start. Like you said, read the bulletin. That's one thing I talked about that in my book. The bulletin, they update the bulletin every year. They talk about the exam, they talk about the passing score, they talk about the structure of the exam. So I think know about the exam you're preparing for. Reading the bulletin helps. Like you said, talking with people, speak with people who have taken the exam, pick their brain and say, hey, what was your experience writing this exam? If you had another opportunity, what will you do differently? If you're lucky enough to have somebody who lets you know that, they had an attempt at the exam, you can also ask them and say, hey, will you be kind enough to tell me what you think, was responsible, especially if it's somebody who failed and now has passed, what do they think they did differently? I think those are good places to start. For me, I read the bulletin. I really, when I was doing my step one, unfortunately, that's one thing I would do differently if I was to do this all over again, is to speak with people who have taken the exam. I literally recall only one person who I spoke with who had taken the exam, and it wasn't really the best of conversations. He just talked about how difficult it was. But talk with people. People who can be frank. Join an online forum or WhatsApp group. You can get a ton of information from them. For example, I keep talking about this in my, from just foraging online, I was able to determine, which day I wanted to take my exam, on which day of the week would make the best sense. So join an online forum, join a WhatsApp group, join a Facebook group, and then of course you got to study, study tested and trusted study materials and answer a ton of practice questions. But those are all good ways to start,
For sure. As I said, reading the bulletin would give you exactly an understanding of what's going on, asking the seniors, learning from the mistakes they've done, learning from the success of others, and there's a lot of actually WhatsApp groups, Facebook, that also they other than specifically of how to do it, they actually share questions, they share knowledge. I remember me and a group of friends and I also had a WhatsApp group where we would send questions, and I think that was correct. That was very useful.
Very helpful. Very, very helpful.
But now it's on more global level that people from different parts of the world.
I know. Yeah.
It's a very nice idea. So the mindset that the people should have. What do you think of that? They should. About what they should know before signing up for the process.
I think this takes us back, once again to the competition. I think it's absolutely essential to get a grip or grasp of the extent of the competition. It's like trying to build a house without initially counting the cost. You have to know your enemy and you have to know yourself. You're competing against candidates from the US, from the Canada, from the Caribbean, Europe, India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Sudan. You're competing against the world entirely, because for everybody who can, aside from the guys, the US grads and the Canadian grads, anybody else who is willing and able to take the USMLE exams is your competition. So I would say if I was still going to say what the mindset, I'll say it's a mindset of ambitious aggressiveness. You just got to be ambitious and you just got to be aggressive. Unfortunately for us, and I alluded to this in the book, oftentimes by the time, we are starting this journey, we're in our late 30s, or mid 30s. I started this, in my, early to mid 30s, early 30s, and as at that time, um, you were not as excitable as we were, as medical students. Some people have to study for USMLE while they have, kids in the house. We've acquired so many, responsibilities, and this sort of bogs us down. Unfortunately, we have to just sort of shed off all that and take on this, this mindset of ambitious aggressiveness, as I said. Otherwise, the being able to mount the kind of response that you need to the competition we're facing, you just may find it difficult to do that.
Yeah, that's a fair answer, and people should really, as you said, be ambitious and aggressive.
Yeah,
it's very important to know what they're signing up for. And other than that, I saw on like your book, because I know that like people need to score, not even for IMGs, it makes it even harder because they need to like score to make it even higher to get up to standards. So if you can elaborate to the audience about in the book you mentioned the first pass versus the other pass. I really like this nomenclature, and because at the end of the day you're passing the exam, but it's not just a regular pass. So
yeah.
Elaborate on the first pass versus the other pass.
Yeah. So, the terms first pass and other pass are terms that I coined, after I heard, multiple IMGs walk up and tell me things like, hey, I have passed all my exams, I am ECFMG certified, yet I haven't matched. And oftentimes the first question I ask them is, okay, when you say you've passed, what exactly, do you mean? What was your score? And oftentimes, I'm yet to be, surprised when these people respond. So the first pass is what I refer to as the first pass, is when you have attained or surpassed the stipulated score that exempts you from retaking the exam. Take for example, as of today, the passing score for USMLE Step 1 is 194. So you score 195, you're good to go. You've passed. Congratulations. But then I now said there's the other pass, meaning you have excelled beyond and above the minimum passing score. And then I further now went on to say, hey, okay, so when does competition start? Does it start at the first pass or does it start at the second pass? People may debate this, but competition doesn't start at the first pass. You have an examining body that gives you an exam. They have to decide, if you pass or you fail. And I'm sure people, have heard about the the transition that's going to be coming up pretty soon regarding step 1. So they got to decide if you pass or fail, and they choose a score. And then as of right now, it is 194. However, when you take a look at the graphs, and all these charts are available, the NRMP data, you take a look at the average step 1 scores per specialty, across board, you're not going to see any score of 194. The mean scores are, going to be in the 220s, in the 230s, and if you get the raw data, you see that the range, actually, the lower border of the range starts way above 194. So that's what I meant, when I said, there's a first pass, which is like, okay, you're good to go. Congratulations, you've passed. But then, are you competitive? And that is where the second pass comes
in. Yeah. I think this is a very important point that everyone preparing for the USMLE should have, and which would add to both the ambition and the aggressive mindset that you mentioned earlier, is for you to gain that first pass. So another point I realized, even for myself, I face this problem, that the length of preparation that an IMG is like set for themselves, this is usually an issue. Do you suggest that they should set a calendar when taking these exams, or just study and whenever they're ready take it? Or
Yeah, I always do, suggest a calendar, in the sense that,
Yeah.
it's, we talk about setting goals, and there's this acronym, I can't remember everything right now, simple, simple, specific, or, stuff like that. You want to be able to, and what I tell people is, okay, welcome to the US.
Yeah.
Read the bulletin, and then now ask yourself, when do I want to apply? So this is the month of May, 2020. And if I was talking with somebody right now, literally, we are talking with people. And if there's somebody out there who's thinking of writing the exams, my next question often is, you know, I know you're just starting this process, but if you wish, when do you think you want to apply? You think you want to apply next year, which will mean September. Then you can work your way backwards and say, okay, between between now and September next year, do I think I'll be ready to put in a decent application? So I always encourage people, to set a calendar. But at the end of the day, it really all depends on how much time you have at your disposal. Some people feel like, I really can't just, you know, I got to do this now. And some people have more time. And secondly, your God-given talents. As doctors, we all have spent a greater proportion of our lives just studying and taking exams. So by now, we know what works for us. So set a calendar. Say, hey, I want to apply by 21. I want to apply by 2022. Therefore, I want to get step one done, knocked out within the next 6 months. And that's a good way to start, because you don't want to shortchange yourself. I told the story of an IMG that I counseled who wanted to take all three of our exams, within a very short period. After speaking with her, I offered my opinion, asking her to slow down a little bit, and she felt slighted by my counsel. She went ahead, took the exam, and she scored less than 200. That was a shocker for her. She slowed down and didn't get to write her CK until almost 2 years after that. She eventually matched, this year, but that was after her third attempt at applying. Now, maybe, just maybe, if she had slowed down initially, and set a more realistic calendar and timetable for herself, maybe she would have done better in step one, and maybe we'll be talking about something different right now.
Yeah, I think this is a really good example that like people should know that, if you take it slow at the beginning, maybe it will pay off for a better purpose
Yeah,
and a better reason for
yeah,
those
potentially. Yeah.
who are trying to rush. I want to ask you another question that you actually mentioned a couple of minutes ago, and myself, I honestly, I've got this question, and I don't have an answer for it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people who are starting their journey right now have this question in their head that what is your take on the recent changes to the USMLE exam, specifically the step one exam becoming a pass or fail?
Yeah.
A lot of people know to say that, is it going to be easier, harder? Is it going to make the matching process easier, hard? So I just want to see what you think.
I know, everybody's all speculating right now, and
Yeah.
the truth is, we don't know. We just have to wait and
Yeah.
see, and keep
Yeah.
speculating. But just like anything, there are pros and cons,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so for the IMG, this is what I think. So number one, if it becomes pass or fail, once we pass, then okay, so let me put it this way. Oftentimes, as humans, that's just how we are. We are always looking for some measure of objectivity, and
Yeah.
step one has always been that thing. Unfortunately, it has been our Achilles heel. Historically, decades, 10, 20 years, you can go back and take a look at the charts. The pass rates for the US grad, has been, in the 90s. The most recent charts, 2018, the pass rate for step one was 95%. 95% of US grads. And 2018 also was a record year for IMGs because the pass rate for step one was 80%. We had never hit 80%. Go back 10 years. We had always been in the 70s. 2017, I think the pass rate was 78%, but it has always been in the 70s. So step one has always been our Achilles heel. So, if step one becomes pass or fail, and we get to that point where we don't have an objective score and people just pass or fail, then there's a likelihood that people will just naturally gravitate and look at the next best thing, which will be step 2 CK. So in my opinion, there's a chance that we don't have that objective measure of step 1. Therefore, programs will need to start looking at step 2 CK. And historically, we've done better in step 2. We've always been in the high 70%. Last year was also a historic year for IMGs. We hit an 83% pass rate in step 2 CK. Now, this is a far cry from what the US grads get, because they always hit 97, 98. Last year, it was 97%. That is 3%. Only 3% of US grads failed step 2 CK. Can you imagine that? Only 3%. Wow. Whereas we had 83%. So it's still a far cry. But if we gravitate towards step 2 CK, then, it may improve our chances. On the downside, in search of a substitute measure of assessment, if CK doesn't become, the prime jewel that we hope that it may become, the next thing will be things like your pedigree. What medical school did you go to? And there's no question that will inevitably favor the US grad, who comes not just from schools who have, with recognizable names. I keep telling people this. It's just a question of, you just don't know what you don't know, and you're just not comfortable with it. So that's why the fact that you're in Texas and you've never been to Utah, and you're a program director, and you see an applicant from the University of Utah, you probably are going to be more favorable towards that candidate from some funny sounding university in Nigeria that you've never heard about. So there's that chance that pedigree, medical school, letters of recommendation, research, all those kind of things will begin to carry more weight. That's the way I feel. So if CK becomes the heavyweight, then we probably have a better chance. If it turns out to be stuff like medical school and all the other things, then our match rate will probably stay about the same, if not maybe decline.
Yeah, that's a very well comprehensive answer. I like how you did it from all the angles, and you probably answered all the questions people had in mind regarding this. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And I would also say for the audience that they shouldn't stop pursuing what they started, or they should continue. And they should continue the road to coming to the US for residency. So right now, let's say, okay, there's an IMG, he took USMLE step 1, he took step 2 CS, he took step 2 CK, he got his her ECFMD certificate, worked a little bit of observerships, externship, got their letters of recommendation, and now comes the other stress that I personally didn't. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people like me are in that position. Didn't know before, like the process, the ERAS application, which is, to my opinion, a whole different process. So, and then sometimes it's not only these the exams and the letters that make you go forward. So I wanted to ask, can you tell us how about yourself and your experience, and how you bought something extra to increase your competitiveness?
So bringing something extra is, and this stemmed from, me, literally, and this is one of those, moments that stuck with me, and I just can't forget. I remember I was just, back home in Nigeria, reviewing my prospects of coming over to the US, and I all of a sudden came across this MD, PhD stuff, and I was like, wait a minute. The people who are going through medical school right now, and they're going to graduate both as doctors as well as with a PhD, and these are the guys I'm going to compete against, and it's was, it's scary. I wanted those guys to match, because I look at them and I'm like, dude, go ahead of me. You're a better candidate.
Yeah, there you
You
go.
know,
The red
yeah.
carpet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's just like when I'm driving, I see a nice Benz, I let them get ahead of me. So
yeah,
I saw that and I was like, wow, this is something. And, as IMGs, the odds are already stacked against us.
yeah,
Look at the match statistics. We don't do that well. And it's yeah, the data, to back up why we don't do that well is there. So bringing something extra was me thinking that, okay, what is going to set me apart, or what is going to make me a little bit more competitive, and that's what every candidate needs to ask themselves. What can I do? What can I add to my resume, that would give me an edge over the next guy? So it wasn't really as if I was, it wasn't a brand new idea that I was, that I could lay claim to. It was just this fact. I'm in Nigeria. I'm coming from a school that nobody knows about. I'm going to apply and compete against guys who have been doing research, who maybe have an abstract, even though their name is the fourth or fifth name listed on the abstract, guys who are coming from recognizable schools. I just needed, to think about something to do, and that's where bringing something extra came from.
yeah. I think this is I like how like this is absolutely thinking out of the box for increasing your match
Yeah,
chances.
yeah.
What would you advise that other ways of increasing your competitiveness or increasing your chances of matching, like other than having a master's degree?
So, starting from the master's degree itself, does the master's degree actually help in increase our chances? And that was the same question I asked about 12 years ago. I asked somebody that, and his answer then was, I really can't remember what his answer was. But when people ask me that, you know, I tell them that it all depends on what you get out of the master's degree. If you just want to get a master's degree and you stamp it on your application, well, it may not really help you. But for example, when I was in my master's program, I got one or two publications, and I was able to meet a number of people of influence that played no little role. They played fantastic roles in ensuring that I am where I am today. And that was so. If I had a crystal ball, and I could get all those networking and all the publication without the master's degree, maybe I would have done something different. Now, I've always had personal interest in, getting doing some research and stuff. But the point was the master's degree was a means to an end. So aside from the master's, what else are people doing, or what else can you do? Now, the PhD is also there. The truth is, when I was coming to the US, I considered a PhD. That was my first choice. The reason I didn't do the PhD goes back to our initial, talk about time. I just felt I didn't have that kind of time. So masters, PhD, good letters of recommendation, those come only by networking. There are some non-ACGME fellowships. Many people are not aware of that, but there are some non-ACGME fellowships. You just got to search and speak with people, and some of these fellowships are 1 year, 2 years, and then that can also increase your chance. There are some positions, postdoctoral positions, and of course we have the popular shadowing, observerships, and clerkships. Those are all things that IMGs can do.
Yeah. Well, I honestly couldn't agree more with what you're saying, and definitely, as you said, having like a master's for you, it depends on what you get from it. Like for you, having a master was a gateway for networking and publication.
Correct.
Yeah, and for me, I would also like add on, as you said, the postdoctoral research fellow. I know a lot of people who kind of do it. People just have to search for it. It's a 1 year position sometimes, and then could work on their department, learn some research, and then get some publications. That could definitely add to your S application or resume.
Correct.
Yeah. And another question that I ask myself a lot, and I ask people ahead of me, I would like to ask you yourself too. What's your take on having taken USMLE Step 3 before applying? Because as the audience would know, that ECFMG certificate is required for IMGs applying, which is Step 1, Step 2 CS, and Step 2 CK. But what about Step 3 before ERAS application? Does that act as a means of increasing your chances?
It really depends. Number one, you don't have to. Nobody's gonna, ding you. Ideally, nobody should ding you if you don't have it. And the truth is, not many programs take performance in Step 3 into consideration. I matched, into general surgery without taking Step 3. But Step 3 becomes important when, for example, number one, a candidate has the poor performance in prior exams. And that's where you begin to see people like, okay, my Step 1 wasn't too good, my Step 2 was fair, and I'm hoping that I want to boost up with my Step 3. That's where it comes in, poor performance in prior exams. So then another thing, small residency programs. There are some small residency programs that don't see a lot of traffic, or see a lot of traffic and just want an extra thing, to, screen out candidates. There really is no big program out there that's going to ask you for Step 3. They don't even talk about it because once you match into the program, you taking Step 3, the onus is on you because you're not going to get your full license without taking Step 3. So that's on you. So the residency programs, big programs don't talk about it. Then finally, I'll say where it also is important is visa consideration. There are some programs where they give you the option and say, hey, we can sponsor an H1 visa or J1 visa. And the truth is, you're not going to get an H1 visa if you don't have Step 3. So in those situations, definitely, take Step 3 and get an H1 visa versus a J1.
Yeah, I think that's that's a very good point about this. So basically, to supplement other low scores you have or something, or definitely for H1 visa, it's a requirement that people should take it. So as IMGs, they usually have some gaps in their application where they would take some time, after you leave your home country and come to America. It's not that easy to straight jump into an observership, externship, or or find a job. So how does having gaps affect your application? Do you suggest should IMGs take a dedicated time just for studying, or should they work part-time if they try to find a job somewhere?
I think it's there really is no straight answer. So let me give you examples, and I try to give examples based on what people have done. So I know a colleague of mine who came straight into the country and didn't get engaged in anything and just studied and did some observerships and shadowing and matched, first time into PEDS. She's completed her fellowship right now and she's working. That was a beautiful success story. However, I also know people who took dedicated months, to studying but did not match. The problem with that is the day between your studying starts. Take for example, you show up, January 1st, 2020, and you start studying, and you're going to study till March day, which will be March next year. What if you don't match, in 2021? Therefore, you're going to have to account for what you've been doing between January 2020 and, March 2021, and even further, because then you're going to be looking at the next cycle. So you've automatically created a 1 year plus gap that you can account for. So my recommendation always is have a realistic plan. For those people who are in their home countries, who are not in the US yet, have a realistic plan as to what you're coming to do. Do you want to have that dedicated time to study and take a chance? That's fine. Or do you want to get engaged in an MPH, PhD, or do you want to be working, and if you're going to work, my recommendation will be maybe not McDonald's, probably in a place where you can put on your CV, on your resume, that will be your best bet. So you just got to be able to take a look at it. So these gaps are inevitable. That's just the nature. You just got to be able to explain. And I always give people that example. I matched 5 years out of residency, and I had my story smack dab when I was interviewing. Like, oh, well, tell me, what have you been doing? Well, I graduated in so year. My first year I spent doing my house job or internship back in Nigeria. The second year I spent, in mandatory service to my country. Then I came over to the US, and in the last 2 years I've been working on a master's degree, and that totally accounted for it. So that's you just got to know, especially if you haven't even stepped into the US yet, have a plan as to what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so just you got to make use of your time, and you got to explain what you're doing, and then you should kind of be saying. So we'll move on to the time frame of residency. So I've, like myself and the audience probably know, people apply in September of every year, and then from September up to like February they go through interviews, and then March the ranking process, the ranking results come out, and then by July they start.
Correct.
So my question is, like, how important is it to apply on time, which is early September, or like when the ERAS opens?
I personally believe, and this is my personal belief, just based on what I've seen. I personally believe it's absolutely essential. And that's why you see all these things. That's why the timelines are there. You check NRMP, the timelines are there. You check ERAS, AAMC, the timelines are there. You check USMLE.org. They tell you, you write your exam, this is when you should be expecting your results. I think, not applying on time is another area that we IMG shoot ourselves in the foot, and sometimes, to be competitive, sometimes all you just need is to be the first, to just be out there and be first, because, several places, even medical schools, have it there already. A website dedicated, or page dedicated to their seniors. This is when you should have your letters of recommendation ready. This is when you should have, your exams done. And the reason I say this is because, based on things I've seen. Let me give you another example. I had a friend of mine, I wrote my USMLE, I'll never forget, USMLE Step 1. I wrote it on August 1st, 2011. I can't remember the timeline, but this friend of mine wrote her exam after mine. She wrote a Step 1 after mine, and she passed. And she was really excited. This was August, sometime in August. So she was like, wow, this is doable. I've crossed the Rubicon. So she quickly went ahead and took Step 2 CK and Step 2 CS. By this time, the application season had opened. Eventually, by the time these results came in, she turned in her application. She probably turned in her application maybe in November or December. At the end of the day, she didn't get any interviews, and she didn't match that year. And she was devastated, and it was already on record, And so I just think, you need to plan, be ready, have your application ready, because anything other than a complete ready application on day one smacks of lack of preparedness. I've heard it all the time. You see, this year is going to happen. Every year it will happen. You go online and you see people like, oh yeah, maybe application season started, September 1st or something, and somebody says, oh yeah, I just took my Step 2 CK, on September 30. Then they begin to get antsy. I'm like, oh, when is my ECFMG certificate going to arrive? Other people have sent in their applications way ahead of you, and those people are already being, vetted for interviews and stuff like that. When you get, eventually, everybody, hopefully, by God's grace, will get into a residency program, and you eventually be able to see that there's so much going on. While we are waiting for that golden moment of September to apply, residency coordinators, program directors are working on the process the entire year, and while you are turning in an application in December or January, they are busy trying to coordinate interviews, for people who would, come over to interview, match in the month of March, begin in July, and the process starts all over again. So I think it's absolutely essential that candidates apply on time.
Yeah. And this just, as I said, it measures how prepared you are, and that the people should actually start preparing earlier so they can have some time to apply on time, because it's a lengthy process indeed. Yeah, another question other than like the importance of applying in time, is there like a specific good way, in quotations, that like candidates should select the programs they apply for? Because there are IMG friendly programs, quote unquote, IMG unfriendly, visa sponsoring, non-visa sponsor. So a lot of people be like, oh, you should apply to over 150 programs. But I feel like you should apply to the right program. So how would you agree on that?
So my response always is this: apply wide and apply smart. Apply wide meaning just apply, and apply smart. Choose your programs. So number one, community programs. And these are programs where not like your classic educational program. So community programs generally tend to be more friendly towards IMGs. And you should look strongly towards applying to community programs versus university programs. I was really fortunate, to match, both my fellowship and my residency. I've been in two big university programs. But typically, IMGs, do very well in community programs. Number two, check out programs where other IMGs have matched, and the fact that one IMG has matched there, there's a good chance another IMG would match there. And go online, see what some of these websites say regarding visa and IMG. Some programs are clear. You're like, oh yeah, US, must have a US passport, or not require visa.
Yeah.
If they can be that blunt on their website, you may not really want to, waste your time and applying to that program. Then another thing, check out FRIDA. FRIDA is a fellowship and residency electronic interactive database, and it's an online database, of all, the ACGME training programs. It gives you an online idea of all the programs. From there, you can take a look at how many positions they have, how many IMGs, So if you take a look at a program, for example, and the program has, 10 positions and 4 of them to IMGs, that's a pretty good number, But you see a program with 6 positions and no IMGs, or 7 and 1 IMG, you have a chance, but not as good as others.
Yeah, I think, as you said, apply smart and apply wide. That's like, this is they should have this as the rule, to be honest, for IMGs, because it's also a pricey process, so you want to put your money in the right place too. Yeah, and another question is when IMGs, so they are applying, as you said, like for competitive specialties. As you said, you mentioned yourself, you applied for surgery, and then you had like IM as a backup. Do you do like advice for that in general?
Definitely. We talked about having a plan A, plan B, plan C, and I shared back then that IM was my, backup. Except if you have an IMG who's willing to stay unmatched and pursue other interests during that interim year, then that's fine. And but otherwise, I think it's a good idea. Because number one, it helps you fill the time. One of the big things against IMGs is lack of clinical experience. So if you get to match into a specialty, number one, you knock that off the table. You gain the so-called clinical experience. It shows you've been in the system. It shows you're probably aware and you are comfortable with electronic medical records. It shows that you have had good interaction, with the U.S. healthcare system. So that's a good one. Number two, you can also leverage your current position to match into your desired specialty. This may even be, number one, it may be in the hospital, in the same program where you are. People have, it just happened. People will switch, from, internal medicine to anesthesia, or it could be at another hospital or program. It could be at the end of your current training. You could wait and finish whatever specialty you decided and pursue the other, or you could switch in between. So for me, I applied to medicine and surgery, and I got both interviews, and I ranked my surgery ahead. I have a mentor of mine who's a very world-renowned pediatric surgeon right now, but he started his first year was in pediatrics before he eventually matched into general surgery, then went on to do his fellowship in ped surgery. So these are all things to consider. And like I know you mentioned the cost, but I always tell people, apply to as many as you can afford to, apply to as many as you think your competitiveness requires. I applied to maybe about 90. Okay, let me share this with you. Many people don't realize I applied to about 90 general surgery programs when I was applying for general surgery. That was me, fresh from Nigeria and everything. Nobody knew me, which was just all I had on paper. I got 2 interviews, about 90. I got 2 interviews. That's 2% of my, But when it was time for fellowship, I was in a better place. I felt really confident about my application. There's so many things that I won't go into that made me feel so strong as a candidate. I got alpha, omega, alpha. I had gotten great scores in my in-training. So I applied to the best programs in the country. I applied to only 30. Many of my colleagues applied to all the 100 cardiac surgery programs in the country. I applied to only 30, and I got 15 interviews. That was 50%. So 50%, so, and I did that just because I knew where I was standing, So those are things to just consider.
Yeah, I think these are very good advices for everyone, especially if they're applying to double specialties. Is there a way they should optimize the ERAS application for these 2 different specialties?
That is always going to be a problem, but at the end of the day, programs just want a good candidate. So if you took a look at my application packet, my internal medicine application packet, you didn't need to read through the lines to know that I smacked off a surgical candidate. My research and publications were all in surgery. Part of my letters of recommendation for internal medicine was written by OBGYN faculty, because I didn't have that much time to work on a great IM application as I had put in to surgery, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, like I said, I got, medicine interviews. I went to about 3 or 4 medicine interviews. And because at the end of the day, they just look at it, you got good scores, you are competitive. Somebody is not going to, if you get 260, even though you have a surgical inclination, they probably want to match you compared to somebody who scores 198, but whose life dream is to be, so there's a chance that, that will play up in your favor.
Yeah, that's fair enough answer. Thank you for that. And how about, how would you, how is the best way to navigate applying into competitive specialties if you have low scores?
I think to get into regardless of
surgery.
For example, surgery, if you have low scores, now people do it. I know there are people I guess the first thing, which of course doesn't matter, but yeah, if you get a low score, the first thing you want to do is be a U.S. medical graduate, and you improve your chances. But of course, that's just a joke. For us, if you have a low score and you're still really looking into competitive specialty, I think the best way is to improve your networking and find that one person who is ready to stick out their neck for you, that one person who's ready to spend their currency of influence on your behalf. Because the truth is, even for the guys who have good scores and IMGs, you still need a lot of legwork. So in my opinion, that's the best chance. You got a low score, you still have your eyes on the top prize, find that one person. Because if you left it to just paper, almost everybody else will beat you or trump you on paper.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much for answering this question.
Yeah, thank you so much for preparing the discussion and several of the topics brought about a lot of questions. I think we have a total of like 8, 9, 10, about 12 questions or so. I think some of the points you have addressed, I'll kind of summarize if they answer any of the questions when I'm reading through them. And I'll also try to answer any questions that have been asked that may not directly require a response. So for example, one person asked, how do they get access to the book? You can find the book on Amazon. It's probably the easiest way to get it. And last time I checked, it was only about $7 to $10 is what I remember. You can also access it through the Kindle book on Amazon as well. And then jumping into the questions now. Let's see. So one of the questions you began addressing was how like applicants can still pursue, like can still make their application strong even if there's a low score on the first step or the USMLE. But I think specifically to kind of do you have any advice on how to make the application stronger? You had talked about having someone who is really willing to advocate for you. Another person had also asked, is there anything that they can do to boost their CV, and specifically like what you would suggest?
So yeah, so for example, if you want to boost your CV, the commonest way and one of the most visible ways is through research. And the research itself is not the silver bullet that's going to solve the problems. But what research really helps you do is meet people. Because oftentimes, you'll be on a research project, maybe you are the one doing the statistics or whatever, and provided it is a clinical-based research, you probably meet the primary investigator, you meet the doctor, you meet the surgeon, you meet whoever it is that is on the clinical side while you guys are on the research side. And that is one of the surest ways. I know people who have gotten into very prestigious residencies without having any advanced degree. These are guys who somehow were able to land a job as research assistants or research coordinators, maybe because of their background, maybe a little bit of statistics, and they were able to land those jobs. And through that, it just opened, this window of opportunity. If there's any way that is sure, that is one way that you can always do that.
And then kind of along that line, a few questions were related to, does it matter where certain things come from? Like, for example, does it matter where the research is done and who writes these letter of recommendations? For example, should it be someone within the US, a physician within the US, or can it be a physician or team that you work with outside of the US? And in conjunction to that, if it's outside of the US, does it matter if whoever's writing the letter was a US graduate or not, who then returned to their own country?
So with respect to where the research is done, it really doesn't matter, provided, for example, there's evidence. When I was in medical school, I can lay claim to being part of some research that we were doing on hepatitis B, but I had absolutely no evidence. We never produced an abstract, there were no posters, and of course, there was no publication. So take, for example, you're involved in research done in China, and it's clearly published, maybe published in an American journal, maybe published online. This is something you can reference. It doesn't matter. Provided it's there, it's veritable, it's verifiable, you're good to go. With respect to the source of your LORs, I personally believe, that it's just better, to get your letters of recommendation from people in the US. However, I must state my reasons, and they're based on my background. My thoughts were, if I got a letter of recommendation from Nigeria, what if they wanted to verify the source? What if they wanted to have a conversation with whoever wrote the letter of recommendation? And these things happen. People make this call all the time. There's a good chance that there will be no reliable phone number they can reach in Nigeria, and of course, there was no answering service. So if you come from one of those other countries where people are reachable by email or phone, then you can potentially get your LORs from them. If this source of your LOR is also well known, for example, in the medical community, take for example, let me just give you a random example here. In cardiac surgery, Tyrone David, he's like one of the foremost giants of cardiac surgery. The guy's, he's a Frenchman. If I were to go anywhere today and produce the letter from Tyrone David, regardless of whether, he's like a god, he's like a demigod. So it doesn't matter. So if you can get a letter of recommendation from somebody of that caliber or somebody that can be verified, it doesn't matter if it's not from the US.
Great. And then another question related similar to that is how can IMGs find these research opportunities or even observerships? And for IR specifically, within the International Outreach Committee, we have a document for IR observership. If anyone's interested, please, send us a question with your email, and me and Andy can get back to you. But I also wanted to open up to you, Khalid and Dr. Adeseye, about any specific resources you may know related to research or observerships, because I think you both have, wider experiences in that as well.
Yeah, Khalid, you want to
go? Yeah, sure. As far as research, I haven't actually done research myself as a postdoctoral fellow, but I know that it's honestly just a Google search away. A lot of websites have a formal postdoctoral fellow research, such as Mayo Clinic, which I know personally. And but if you actually go to the program itself, go to the specialty you like, find the faculty and try to email them, call the office. You just have to get out of the way to find someone, and I'm sure you'll find someone that was willing to help. I know it's hard sometimes to find a specific website to do it, but definitely if you look online and go specifically reaching out to these mentors, you can. As far as observerships, there are multiple observerships that are online. If, for example, internal medicine, what I did is if you go internal medicine observership for IMG on Google, and you'll find at least a couple of hospitals, maybe up to 5 or 10, the ones that I know of, that have a formal internal medicine observership. Some of them cost money, some of them no. And then obviously networking plays a big role in this too. If you know someone that knows a doctor who's willing to have you work under them, that would help.
That's perfect. That's, Khalid has covered everything. That's pretty much it. That's the three-pronged approach. Networking. Sometimes you just got to keep in touch with people who I was able to say while I was in Oklahoma, we had a pretty good observership pathway, and a friend of mine just sent me an email once and said, hey, what can you do to help me? And I walked them through the process, and helped him set up an observership. Some programs are like that. Some the path is a little bit more twisted, but that's the way. I can agree with Khalid anymore or any less.
Thank you both for sharing that. And there was another question kind of asking about how can you make these connections and networks. And I think sometimes it can be challenging when it's someone familiar or unfamiliar or new, and oftentimes physicians are really busy, so trainees kind of feel intimidated to intrude on time. But a lot of the times, if you want to find mentors, there's mentors out there. It's just if you persist and keep searching for someone who is able to help you answer the questions. Everyone has so many different experiences, but taking the time to keep searching and not giving up, eventually you'll find someone who will be able to help you find those answers. And I think some of that goes back to what both of them have mentioned about, reaching out to the people around you, but at the same time, continue to attend these different societies or organizations that have these kind of structures in place to help you meet people who are interested in helping you get connected as well. I think those are good opportunities. Did either of you have any additional thoughts on this kind of mentorship or connecting with people who would be able to write good letters of recommendations?
Actually, I would add to, like, as you said, how to network. I mean, as I said, like, reach out to as many people. During the process, you'll find people that want to help you. You'll find people that want, and those who want to help you will be very clear from the beginning. And so these kind of people are obviously, and like my experience with SIR itself, like it was a Google search, like Interventional Radiology Societies. And then I attended a meeting, attended the other meeting, and then I found the RFS and then the International Outreach Committee, and then I got involved. So it's just a staircase kind of process until you find the right place. That's
I agree. I agree.
Awesome. Yep. I love that. Don't give up. And then there's a couple of questions kind of pertaining to, because of COVID currently, that have changed scheduling for things. So for example, one question was asking about step 2 CS is delayed because of COVID and kind of the, social distancing. And people were wondering, how do you think this will affect the application process, and and how does like having the delay of 12 to 18 months before this next CS can happen, how do you think that will affect their chances of getting a good match?
Well, unfortunately, the entire process is still really fluid, and things are constantly changing. Um, they haven't, to my knowledge, they haven't changed the requirements, meaning to be ECFMG certified, you gotta have, step 1, 2, CS and CK, and one has to still do those things before you apply. I'm sure the authorities concerned are thinking about ways around this. My take will be just continue, just keep your focus and do what you keep doing. And whenever these exams are available, we will be able to take them. They may need to make some changes. Take, for example, if CS is still not available, and we know the ERA season is going to start in June, literally next month, and applications are going to start in September. If the criteria is still, you need step 2 CS to be ECFMG certified, technically they're going to be, limiting a whole lot of people who haven't taken CS. I really don't know what the governing bodies are going to want to do about that. They may want to say, okay, let's just go with those we have, or they may say, after all, the match is not until next, year. Then let people take their CS towards the end of the year, when the COVID situation is clearer. But we just have to wait and see, unfortunately.
Sure. And also along kind of that same line, if there's virtual interviews instead of in-person interviews, do you think that how like would that impact IMGs as well?
I really don't think it will impact, IMGs negatively. In a way, it actually may be better, because all these interviews are stressful situations, and you have the stress of travel, you have the stress of going, to an environment you're not familiar with. But if you have the opportunity of interviewing in the comfort of your home, it doesn't change the fact that it's an interview, but at least, it takes that stress out of you, because you're just part of the stress out of you because you're in a familiar environment. I don't think it's going to negatively affect, candidates at all, because the same communication, the same things that you communicate to the interviewers in person, you should be able to communicate via web interviews. Ideally, it shouldn't change anything at all. I just think candidates should take it as an opportunity, to be more comfortable in a stressful condition.
Sure. And there's also 2 more specific questions. So the first one, let me read it directly because I don't think I can summarize this well, but it says they want to know the pros and cons for J1 visa and H1B visa. What do you recommend?
I will speak heavily about J1, because that's what I'm on and that's what I know about. I'll probably make just 1 or 2 points about H1. So the J1 visa, well, is it's an exchange student visa, okay? And I don't know if all countries, but there are some countries that have a home requirement, meaning whenever you come to the US or the J1 visa for whatever, be it masters. When I took my masters, I knew people, who came in on J1 visas, whatever you do, whenever you complete whatever it is you're doing in the US, you're required to go back to your home country for 2 years before you can come back to the US to take up any other assignments. And that's the big snag about the J1. The way around that is to do what we call there are many ways around that, a few ways, but the common way is to do what we call a waiver, where you go to specific regions of the US, to serve specific populations, underserved, kind of populations. So that is the big snag against J1 that many people do not like. The fact that at the end of your training, you just cannot pick up a job that you want. You are restricted as to where you can practice. Another thing about J1 is that it does not provide a direct path to having a green card. And regardless of your intentions, when you come into train, the truth is it is just more comfortable if you have a green card. Traveling is easier. I know somebody who traveled on a J1 visa and got stuck in Nigeria for a whole month. He was just lucky that that entire month was his vacation. Because he had to get a new visa. Of course, every time you go out of the country, you got to get a new visa. So, but the H1, as opposed to the J1, gives you that opportunity to transition to a green card. And one of the best success stories I tell you is this. I know a friend of mine wrote step 3 after she matched, and they gave her an H1B visa. She stayed in that hospital for 3 years for IM and stayed in the same hospital for an extra 3 years for PEDS for her fellowship. And in that 6-year period, the hospital actually transitioned her from an H1 to a green card. So that by the time she was done, she already had a green card, which is good. It just makes life, better and easier and more convenient. So those are the 2 things about a J1. And then one more thing about the J1, you can only be on a J1 visa for a total of 8 years. So for people like me who train forever, I'm actually maxing out my J1 because I had 5 years of general surgery and now 3 years of a fellowship. If I had done my master's on a J1 visa, I would have been in a big problem because I would have used 2 years on a master's, 5 years in general surgery, then I would have been stuck. I wouldn't have been able to move forward with my fellowship.
Thanks for sharing that. This is my first time learning about that, so it's actually helpful for me to know and be able to engage in those conversations in the future. And then one other question, I think it'll be the last question that's come through so far, is one applicant asked how to optimize an ERAS application for 2 different specialties. Kind of earlier in the discussion, there was the talk about having backup plans. So for example, if someone's applying through ERAS for something, how can they optimize it if they were doing like both EM and family medicine, or say surgery and another specialty? Do you have any suggestions for that as well?
The big thing is plan early. Plan early that this is what you're going to do. You don't want to, yes, it's a backup plan, but you don't want to engage your backup plan late. And the reason I say this, and I'll give you my own example, I knew right from the get-go that I was going to apply for general surgery. At the back of my mind, I knew I was going to apply for internal medicine, but I didn't start working on my internal medicine early on as compared to my general surgery application. As such, I struggled at the very end to get letters of recommendation. So 2 of my letters of recommendation actually came not from full attendance, but actually from fellows, and who were not even in internal medicine, but who were just OB/GYN fellows who I knew. So the way to optimize your ARS application for 2 specialties, number one, know early that this is what I want to do, such that you can always, for example, you may want to do 2 observerships in 2 different specialties. If you knew right from the get-go, then you'll be able to pursue that. As I've talked about letters of recommendation, anything at all that you'd be like, okay, this is, you may want to volunteer. For example, you want to do IM and PEDS. You may want to go volunteer in some PEDS clinic. You may want to say, hey, for my networking purposes, I'm going to attend some national PEDS meeting, where maybe I'll be able to meet people. Khalid talked about meeting people at meetings. It's a great opportunity. I was at a meeting once and somebody just walked up to me. I went to represent my program at a surgical Jeopardy competition, and he saw me on the podium during the competition. And after the competition, he came over and said, "Hey, congratulations!" Of course, even though we didn't win, but he was like, "Hey, congratulations!" And and he introduced himself, and that's how we got to meet. The final thing also that we didn't talk about in networking, social media. I can't tell you how many people have just reached out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn. And that's how we started. So plan early, know that this is what I want to do. This is my backup specialty, and then just begin to, channel your time and your resources towards that.
Thank you for sharing that. I just want to note that right now it's around 9:30, and I know we had planned for this to be 1 hour, so thank you both for being able to stay on and answer all these questions and discuss with us. There are probably a few more questions that have come through that we may not be able to address right away, but thank you for asking those questions. I will put mine and Andy's contact information into the chat box when this session is over so that you can see it for like a minute or two to write it down. Feel free to email us with any questions you may have. And is there any last words or comments you or either of you would like to make?
Well, I want to say thank you, Khalid, for a beautiful interview. And I also want to say a big thank you to Yi and Andy for, helping to co-moderate this. And I'm really humbled, just for the opportunity. Like I told you guys, mentoring is one thing I really, just taking it up, and that's what I really want to do now. And I thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great conversation, and I'm happy to help anytime.
Yeah, this is me, Khalid. I would like to thank you, Doctor, for answering and being very, very, I think for me, I wish I had talked to you before I applied. I'm sure I would have been more efficient. So I can only imagine how much the audience would benefit from this conversation, and pleasure to be here interviewing you. And thanks to Yi and Andy for organizing this. And for anyone, I would also be more than happy to answer. I know my experience is not that much, but I've went through the process, so might be able to answer a couple of questions. I'd be happy to do that too. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, honestly. And thanks for all the audience who gave us their time.
Thank you guys so much for sharing of your time with us, and just really, really great, inspiring words for us all to learn from. I'll just point out too that on the RFS website, we do have a guide to matching as an IMG, and we have additional resources that we're in the process of uploading, by including this webinar. This will be recorded and uploaded, and as Khalid kind of referenced earlier, we have a database of observerships for people interested in IR observerships here in the United States and stuff like that. So stay tuned for additional resources to kind of complement the discussion that we had tonight. So thank you, everyone, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. Have a good night.